Start the stream out basically talking a little bit about 7.0 and some things that I want and some things that I think it needs. Basically like a whole list of stuff that I think it to be really good for 7.0 and all that. There's a few things in Final Fantasy 14 that I feel like they could really improve on. I mean, I'm not saying that there's anything bad with the way that Final Fantasy 14 is already handling a lot of their content and a lot of their expansions. In terms of 7.0, considering that we're kind of going back to like a refresher, I wanted to be able to, you know, bring in some pretty good stuff and changing a few things. Not drastically. I'm not that type of person who's like, oh, let's drastically change Final Fantasy 14. No, I'm not that type of person. There are a few wants and needs that I want in 7.0. I think in terms of like the expansions for Final Fantasy 14, they've been getting better. Yeah, each expansion that I have played personally, I feel like they've been getting better and better at certain aspects of content, while also there are some things that I feel like they have done better in another one that maybe they can blend together and make the perfect expansion, which I don't think there's such thing as a perfect expansion. There's never such thing as a perfect expansion. There's always like some things that some people will like and some things that some people won't like. So it's whatever as that goes. One of the most important things to me personally that I want in 7.0, and this might be a strong need as well, is a fresh start. Make it like a small but big scale story. I like the whole idea of us starting a whole new story arc in 7.0. They allude to that at the end of Endwalker, and they kind of been talking about it in a lot of interviews and live letters. I think having them to go back to a much more smaller scale, going back to the adventurer days, is actually a great thing in itself. And if I had to say what they should go by, is like kind of go back to the Heaven's Ward type of pacing. Not pacing, let me take that back. Let me rephrase this. I want them to go back to how the structure of how Heaven's Ward was in terms of story. Heaven's Ward, it was a small scale, but it was still pretty big in its own kind of way. What I'm basically saying here is that Heaven's Ward was all about the Dragon Song War, a war that's been happening for thousands of years. I think it was only like 1,000 years really. And it was a war between man and dragon. And really all it was is everything that was going on within like Korthus, or people within the land of Korthus and all that. And I think having a story that's big, of course, it's big and it's important, but it's big and important to this one particular part in this world itself. A good example would be like, how about whenever we go to this new continent? When we go to this new continent, I think having them being able to talk about whatever troubles that they might be running into, I think it'll be good for us to try to figure out why the new content is off the grid. Because from what what Endwalker was pretty much hinting at the end with Emmett Selk and I think it was Hythlodaeus. Yeah, Hythlodaeus. They both were talking about, oh, there's still so much of Atheres for us to explore. Why don't you go and explore those places? I think there was like an underwater place. Maybe there's like something kind of like Atlantis. But I was thinking, okay, well, if there's like an underwater place like Atlantis, that could potentially be part of the new continent, or it could be something for like a later raid or something. But I think going back to a particular place in a world, kind of like how Heaven's Ward was, and focus on the story there, is a good starting point to start over with the story. It's going to be building up to the next saga. That next saga is going to be whatever it happens to be about. I don't know, maybe they will come up with things that are happening with the shards, which I think that's what they're going with in terms of the story, building upon the mythologies or creating new mythologies or something like that, which I don't think they're going to be creating a whole new mythology, but I think that there's going to be some elements that are maybe revealed that wasn't there in the beginning, and maybe there's some new stuff, like, you know, maybe there's like a hidden god or something, or something else that was happening before Hydaelyn and Zodiark, something like that. I think introducing new characters as well will be a great thing going in with 7.0. They need to introduce a lot of new characters. I do like our Scions, and they played their part, and I do want the Scions to continue being their own thing, and I would like them to continue being with us within our adventures as well. But I kind of want a all new Avengers type of approach. And if you know how like the new Avengers work, it's pretty much like some old but new Avengers being a part of the team. And I think introducing new characters like maybe Zero, that will be actually pretty great in itself, and we can go with that type of approach. Yeah, just pretty much building upon the next big saga right there in itself. So I think one of the next big opinions for me that's very, very important, because we had this issue with the last two expansions, in Shadowbringers and Endwalker. One of the biggest issues that I had with each expansion is there is this section that I like to call it a Mount Gulk or Ethereal Sea Dragging section, and that is where the games decides to throw at you a bunch of boring quests that are important to the story, but they drag on way too long, and there's like very little of stuff happening. It's really just ruining the pace. And I know it's building up to something, like it's usually building up to the next big trial, which is the second boss fight in the expansion. It's just boring. I don't like it. So I'm hoping whenever 7.0 comes out and the expansion does, the story pacing is going to be a little bit better, because it's a little disappointing. The pacing of the story is really good throughout the expansion until we get to that second boss fight. Once we get to that second boss fight, that's when it starts to get a little bit, okay, this is getting boring, it's dragging on, it's ruining the pacing. Other than that, it's been pretty good, not too bad. All right, this next part I think is very important, but we all see it's going to be happening, is introducing new jobs. This is common sense with every expansion. Jobs are like classes. Each expansion they introduce new classes / new jobs. I do have a few lists of things, but I think that's going to be its own video for a later time. But just to list off a few, Blitzball player and the whip class are probably two things that I want the most. Other than that, I think a Chimnest or a Geomancer could be pretty much hinted, or maybe even a Time Mage might end up being hinted with Cryle at the end or at the beginning of 6.4. So who knows? I'll talk about the other classes at a different time. Not want to talk about it tonight because that will take up so much more time. But as of right now, I just want to mention those and say yes, maybe like 2 or 3 new classes this next section. I think we should have like a magic and range DPS for this next expansion, considering that range needs a little bit more love, and maybe magic as well. Let's see, where was it at? The miscellaneous section. Okay, so the miscellaneous section is just a bunch of stuff that I want to throw in that I feel like it's most common that we're gonna get, or potentially may or may not get. The first part will be the trials, dungeons, and zones. I'm not too worried about those. I think they're gonna do excellent with each one of those with no problem. They've been getting better each expansion, so no need to worry. As far as like Endgame though, the Endgame stuff, a lot of people didn't enjoy Endwalker's Endgame. There was a lot of things that was going on with Endwalker's Endgame. Not everyone was very happy about it. I'm satisfied, but I can see how some people weren't. So some things they could potentially do is probably give us like another Eureka or Boja, kind of like what Stormblood and Shadowbringers had. They had a really big, nice zone where you can grind for quite some time and do extra pieces of content and story. I think they were hoping Island Sanctuary to be something like that, but it didn't really work out too well. Variant dungeons, more variant dungeons by other key leaders. That'll be great. So far, we only have Yulda and Kugane, which is good enough, but I would like to see more key leaders that were prominent in the entire game. And the last thing, the raids itself, like I think more like a Pandemonium raid, because the Pandemonium raid was awesome and we're gonna be doing more of that tonight. That was a very great raid. The music was great, the fights were fun, and the story was also very satisfying. So I would like to have more of that in the normal raids. As far as like Alliance goes, I'm fine with either a crossover or a reference to other Final Fantasy games, maybe even other franchises that Square owns. If not, maybe more lore built around the shards or the places that we have visited within Eorzea. That is pretty much a lot of my wants and a couple of needs that I feel like 7.0 of Final Fantasy XIV needs for the new expansion. So here's to hoping that they improve in a lot of things. I feel like they've been improving every expansion, so no worries on that whatsoever. But just a few things I wanted to mention here that has kind of bothered me, and some things that I really want to see going forward. I guess we'll find out in a few months whenever we have the fan fest on what they have in store for us.